Request to approve the 2023-24 mid-year budget revision. Kandice Moynihan, our Assistant Superintendent of Finance and Operations.
As Kandice comes up, I know this is actually the first opportunity for Kandice to get in front of the board as well as our community. We are so thrilled to have Kandice. She has been an amazing member of our team and has stepped right in. And we really couldn't be more pleased to be working with her. There's been some changes that we're making moving forward, and I know our staff, especially our administrative staff, are really excited to embark on that process.
Welcome, Kandice.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I am here tonight for the opportunity to present the mid-year budget amendment to the Board of Education. As Superintendent McDonald has mentioned, everybody has been very welcoming, and I'm very excited to be here. I'm going to walk through the mid-year changes for the general fund today. So as a reminder, the general fund is our main operating fund of the district, where we record all of our K through 12 activities, as well as our Bloomfield specific, not center programs, special education programs, and as well as our preschool programs for the district. Just for clarification, because our colleagues from PMR were up here reviewing some significant costs by the way of bond projects. They often talk about sinking fund projects as well. Those projects are separately accounted for in different funds, and the general fund does not incur any of those capital projects expenditures. Okay. So I've had the opportunity to present the Board of Education with some more detailed information by way of the budget, the presented budget amendment by function or department, as well as by object, which would be the type of expenditures that we're spending our dollars on here, salaries, benefits, purchase services, and such. And you've also been provided with a memo with some additional information about the changes that to the budget that we're presenting tonight, as well as had many small group discussions with most of you. So today I am going to review the most significant of those changes by way of revenue adjustments and expenditure adjustments, and then we'll open it up for some opportunity for questions at the end. So our general fund revenue adjustments, we are proposing a 0.5% decrease from the original budget that was adopted in June. That is approximately $578,000 of a net decrease. The most notable decreases here are in the area of local source revenue and state source revenue to the school district. We are increasing our local source revenue, that is primarily the property taxes that we collect from our taxpayers in the community. That would be our homestead by way of the hold harmless additional millage that we have, but primarily also the non-homestead 18 mills. So as our property taxes, as our property tax values increase, the value of that 18 mill increases as well. So we are adjusting our local tax revenue to account for increases to the taxable values of our properties in the community by $2.1 million. Additionally, we've been very fortunate along the lines consistent with the PMR presentation that we are earning additional interest income on our liquid funds here in the general fund, as well as some CDs. So we're making an adjustment by way of about $600,000 to the district by way of local source revenue here. That is something we will keep an eye on. Just keep in mind as we move forward into 24, 25, and keep an eye on the market and the interest rates if we need to pull that back for next year. The other very primary source, significant source of revenue to the school district is our state source revenue. This would be the category where our foundation allowance from the state of Michigan comes from. So a positive here is that the district did make enrollment projections back in the spring to develop the original budget. The foundation allowance does come to us from the state of Michigan by way of a per pupil allowance, so that follows our students. As enrollment increases, the dollars that follow the students increase. Unfortunately, that model provides for a decrease in funding when we lose kiddos. So we had projected that we were going to be losing 85 kids. We've actually lost, our funding is projected to be at a level of 5,115 students, which is a reduction of 79. So we've gained 6, essentially that is flat, consistent with the original projection. Also at the time, we had projected that we would be receiving $458 per pupil for that foundation increase, and that is also consistent, bringing our total foundation allowance to $13,443 per pupil. It is important to recognize that the relationship of this per pupil foundation allowance is directly tied to our local property tax revenue. So we do not receive $13,443 per pupil directly from the state. It's an actual inverse relationship between the property taxes that we receive. It assumes a local, the calculation, if you will, assumes a local contribution from our property taxes. So when our property taxes go up, our property tax values, property taxes increase, then the obligation for the unrestricted funding for the to us as a district from the state goes down. There's another slide that shows this really nice visually that we'll get to just here in another minute or two. So just making recognition that albeit all other things being equal, the 5,115, the 458 being consistent, that is still a decrease in revenue from an unrestricted source because of the offset to property taxes. Additionally, we're increasing our state source revenue. In addition to the state foundation allowance that we have here, here at Bloomfield Schools, as well as all of the K-12 schools in the state of Michigan, we also receive various categorical funding sources. So these are funding sources. Some of them are on a competitive basis. Some of them are on a per pupil basis. But essentially, they are restricted to very specific purposes, such as our special education funding, our at-risk funding, transportation funding, and then we also receive certain retirement funds. Built into the original budget under state source revenue this year was certain one-time pass-through revenues from the state of Michigan directly related to buying down a long-term liability related to the state's pension plan. So the original budget included $5.9 million that was one time to the school district, all school districts in the state of Michigan for 22-23, and that carried forward into this year. So albeit I'm talking about some nice increases, you will see a decrease to state source revenue because we do need to remove that $5.9 million that is one-time pass-through revenue. Likewise, we remove it on the other side of the puzzle. We also remove that $5.9 million from expenditures from the retirement costs. So there is no direct impact to fund balance, but I did want to point out that our original budget by way of revenue and expenditures were both overstated by that $5.9 million. And then we had some additional retirement funding. So I think we have about 6 categories of it from the state now by way of 147 A, B, C, D, E, F. So we'll climb up the alphabet there. But we do have some additional retirement income that is increasing the state source revenue as well. So you can see here, this is a pie graph that would just show you the percentages in terms of our revenue by source. We do have 4 sources of revenue. Local, we talked about. State, we also do receive federal grants. We didn't have significant changes to our federal grant revenue, although if you were comparing that to the past couple of years, you would see that decrease because our COVID funding has started to taper off. As well as some inter-district funding that we receive primarily from the ISD by way of our Act 18 special education millage. So you can see here 52%, we are very dependent on the state, as well as 38% locally. Combined, that is 90% of our revenue. Very dependent on that state aid foundation formula here. As I mentioned, our foundation allowance this year is for 23-24 is $13,443 per pupil. I thought it was important to show, and this will show you the past 4 years of history as well, the relationship of the local contribution in comparison to the state contribution, so that you can see here, if you were comparing 22 to 23, so that middle line, that middle group of the block of color, the lime green, if you will, you can see that last year we had lower property tax values than this year. And so this year, that $3,074, we have a higher contribution, thus resulting in the lower, I suppose that is an emerald green color below it, of $6,534 per pupil compared to $6,561 per pupil in the prior year. Additionally, we are a hold harmless district, which allows us, grateful to our taxpayers who have supported the levy, allows us to levy an additional $3,835 per pupil on our homestead properties here. The combined value of that local contribution by way of property taxes, hold harmless and non-homestead on our commercial properties, is a total of $6,909 to the district that we're dependent on from our local, taxpayer approval. So that's 51.4% of that $13,443. So we're actually more dependent on the local support than the state here at Bloomfield. And that's the equivalent of over $35 million to the district. So I am highlighting this because we will start to enter into conversations over the next course of the month about those millage renewals that are required and tied to the state funding formula. So the other side of the puzzle and the piece of the information to talk about is our expenditures. And we have also made some significant expenditure adjustments from the original budget. The dollar amount cumulatively is $1.2 million increase, which also represents a 1.2% increase from the original budget. We are a service organization, so the majority of our costs here are salaries and benefits for our employees. The original budget adopted back in June did assume that from the K-8 reconfiguration that we experienced this year as a district, that we could potentially assume some wage savings by way of a little over $1 million. Along with that, we also committed to not laying off any of our employees during the restructuring. So we would be leaning in to certain attrition savings by ways of retirement that would fit perfectly into that puzzle, if you will, when we reconfigured. And that did not happen, and those savings did not materialize. So we are increasing our wages to account for not reducing our workforce, if you will, significantly, and adding those salaries and benefits back, as well as just adjusting our salary footprint and benefits that follow to meet our current staffing levels and contractual agreements with all of our various bargaining units. I should note that when we do compare the salary projection now with this amended budget to prior year actual, we are increasing the salaries by about 2.5% on average, which is very reasonable and in line with all of our contractual bargaining agreements. So that does feel right in the absence of a large change because of attrition savings or staff reductions. So along those lines, salaries, benefits follow salaries. I had mentioned that included in the revenue was the one-time $5.9 million in the pass-through retirement income. The other side of that is retirement expense. So I am pulling out the $5.9 million of benefits. So when you compare the original budget for benefits to the amended budget, it would appear that there is a decrease, but note that's offset by additional increases. I have to adjust the salaries by approximately $1.7 million. The benefits follow on that for the retirement and the FICA. We do pay approximately 31% into the Michigan pension system for all of our employees. And so that is a significant dollar amount that would follow on $1 million. We're looking at $310,000 for retirement alone. Additionally, I do want to note that the original budget was based on an average retirement rate of 28%. So the last couple of years, we have been trending at paying an average rate of 28% into the ORS. This year, that rate bumped up significantly to 31%. That is approximately $1.5 million on our $51 million of salaries, so quite significant to the school district. We're also acknowledging that we continue to have additional retirement pass-through costs that are that increase one side on the revenue. These are ongoing, so we have also acknowledged the other side of that and included that in our benefits. And we have made an adjustment to our fringe benefits. The district is self-insured for health care, dental, and such, and all of our fringe benefits. And given the nature of the healthcare market, with the healthcare rates that we are paying as well as our usage, we have experienced an increase in that trend out of our self-insured fund, and we did have to make an allocation back to all of our funds. So this is the general fund amendment, but you would also expect to see, as we amend special revenue funds next month, an increase to fringe benefits for really all of our employees that take our fringe benefits here. Purchase services, that's also a people expense. We do pay for people that are not directly employed in services by way of third-party contracts. There was a significant increase to purchase services. A large part of that relates directly to our custodial contract. We should make mention that in prior year, we were experiencing and living in a space where we did not necessarily have all of our positions filled. So we were down about 10 positions. We realized some savings from that. This year, we are fully staffed. The original budget really rolled forward last year's costs. This year, I need to true that up to reflect that we have full staffing in our custodial contract, as well as reflect the adjustments to agreed upon wage increase for those folks too. Additionally, so that we did not decrease any of our routes for transportation, we are recognizing some costs from third-party drivers this year. And then we have some folks, substitutes, but other folks that are just hired through EDGE's staff that don't take our benefits, and we did align all of their contractual increases in usage with the sub-usage as well. So purchase services was also increased during this budget amendment. There were not significant changes to supplies, outgoing tuition. Debt service is essentially, we're required now under GASB rules to record certain operating leases, traditionally in the past as debt service. So we aren't making bond payments, if you will, out of this fund. It's just a classification issue for an accounting requirement. So again, the general fund expenditures by object, this isn't necessarily on the departmental level, but just gives a really high level of a visual of the areas that we are spending our funds on. Being a people organization, a service organization, this is consistent with what we would expect. 84% is directly related to our employees here at Bloomfield. And if you account for that purchase service piece, which is also primarily people, 93% of our costs are directly related to people here. And so we have very little by way of discretionary funding that comes out of our general fund, and is primarily around people. Okay. So this is the snapshot when you put everything together. We are proposing that we amend the budget and propose total revenue of $109,701,000, a reduction of $578,000, as well as total expenditures of $111,585,000. That is an increase to expenditures of about $1.2 million or 1.2%. And then the resulting change is a net change in fund balance of a current year deficit of approximately $1.8 million. which is about 1.6% of our total expenditures, if you were looking at that deficit in comparison to the total expenditures. So here we are in March with a mid-year revision, and before you know it, it'll be June with the final adoption. And so I expect, I would expect that the question would be, so what, now what? What are we going to do with this information? You can see that we are currently projecting a structural deficit. I can confidently say that this is not considered to be a crisis from our leadership team. This is considered to be an opportunity to take a look at to really dive deep into our costs by way of a budget balancing review that we will do collaboratively and collectively with Cabinet and the leadership to review all of our opportunities for staff alignment, our cost structures, and priority, though keeping in mind that we want our dollars to follow the student experience and our classroom resources. We are here to serve our students. We are going to be implementing a very collaborative budgeting process moving forward, owning the budget as a collective team, and making decisions for the programs that we will need to review, all of our cost structures, our contracts. Also recognizing that we do receive grants. And so taking a deep dive into our grants with strategic planning and use of available grant funds, as well as continued enrollment, recruitment, and retention efforts. I know that our kindergarten roundups and our family tours have been really successful, so I'm excited to see what that brings to us by way of our kindergarten families when we look at our enrollment. Coming up down the pipeline, I don't note it here, but next month we will be talking about our special revenue funds, our center program, the IA, food service, also looking at those funds and opportunity in terms of, we have looked at, I will pivot and say, anything that is directly impacting the general fund has already been considered. I don't want to bring surprises to the Board of Education by looking at them later, but we will bring them for formal amendment next month. And then come June, although we will not be waiting until June, we are already starting our efforts as a cabinet team to make the budget discussion a routine conversation, but we will bring forth a 23-24 final amendment. And we are hopeful that we'll be able to also still take a look at our activity and pull back where we can now, as well as a 24-25 adoption for June based on some assumptions that we can make going into the new school year. So with that, I will pause. That is what I have for you formally tonight, and I will stop for questions.